Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the Senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. Welcome to this week's edition of Kibbitzing with Kagan, brief conversations with people I find fascinating. This week's guest is Portia Zwicker, who has had the experience of being a surrogate mom, has done gestational surrogacy. And we're going to find out more about that and more things about her. But thank you, Portia. Sorry for an awkward introduction, but I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. It's really nice to talk to you outside of our usual venues of Scrabble tournaments.
Exactly. And we are totally going to get to Scrabble.
Okay.
So you are a technical writer, you are a wife, you are a mom. Your daughter, I think, is 6 now?
7.5. Yeah.
7.5. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And you work in environmental advocacy. You have all of these things that you do.
Yeah.
And then you had a cousin who was having trouble conceiving. So
Right.
talk like that's how you started down this road of surrogacy.
Yeah.
So tell us that story, if you would.
So one day, she and her husband, who were not actually very active on social media, made a post on Facebook saying that they were looking to adopt. I'd always been a little bit curious about their plans for family, but never prodded and poked because it's not my business. And they made this post, and I didn't know at all if this was because they had not been able to have their own children or if this was something they specifically wanted to pursue. So I very carefully worded an email to them in the case that it was that they were having their own fertility issues, offering to carry for them. And obviously I talked about my husband before I offered, but I have one child and I only ever wanted one child. Don't want any more children of my own. But I actually really enjoyed being pregnant, which I know, a lot of people don't hear that from many women, I think. And I was kind of sad to not experience it again. And here was this opportunity of the two things, right? Being able to experience pregnancy again. Well, three things: helping someone,
Yes.
and not having another child of my own.
Right.
And so she was not expecting that from me. They had not considered surrogacy. They were struggling from infertility. They took a lot of time to think about it, research it, look at their finances, all those things, and eventually did accept my offer. And so that was the first time I was a surrogate.
I can't even imagine her getting that email. What an enormous, life-changing, generous offer. Let's talk through. So you give the 3 reasons. How did Mike, your husband, react when you first said, "Can we talk about something?"
Yeah, my husband's very go with the flow, which is very helpful in these situations.
So.
He's very supportive, but also just kind of like lets me do my thing. And he asks the right questions, though. And this came up more when I did it the second time, actually. But for the first time, it was very much like, I trust you to know what you're doing and to find out that you know what you're doing or not. And this is a distant cousin of mine, but actually is much closer to me than most of my relatives.
Okay.
So he was very supportive of helping them, of all people. So he was totally on board.
So what was the hardest conversation that you had with your cousin?
Oh, that's a really good question. So probably there weren't hard conversations. And there very easily can be, but we agreed on so many things right up front that we did not have to have the difficult conversations about selective reduction, termination, and things like that. Those can be.
Let's talk about what those are.
Yeah.
So let's rewind the clock. Surrogacy, to anyone who's watching who
Sure.
might not be familiar with the term, is you carrying a pregnancy for someone, carrying a pregnancy that you don't intend to keep, that you will deliver and then to someone else, and you are carrying it on behalf of someone else. So
Yes.
selective reduction and termination. Let's talk about
So selective reduction is when you choose to say you have triplets that you weren't expecting, so the embryo splits, and that is unsafe for you, the carrier, and possibly also babies. Many people go through with the triplets, but the decision to reduce to 2 or 1 is one you have to have in case that occurs. And then termination, of course, is abortion, in a medically necessary abortion. And she and I align on all these things. So this was, clearly, like, I was allowing her to make the decisions on under what conditions would you want to terminate, for instance, like a condition the baby wasn't going to survive. Obviously, if my health is in danger, yes. And I was unwilling to carry triplets, but I was willing to carry twins.
Okay.
So, and she agreed.
No octomom here, huh?
Oh my gosh. We can get into why that happened, but that's the science behind it.
Yeah.
So, and we agreed that we were only going to transfer 1 embryo, because that's the highest chance of having only 1 baby.
Yes. Okay. And to be clear, usually the male partner's sperm, if he has viable sperm, and then with, we don't need to get into details, but with an egg, and that is implanted in a lab and then inserted and implanted.
Yeah. In surrogacy, so there's 2 types of surrogacy. There's gestational and traditional or genetic. So in traditional or genetic, the gestational surrogate is also providing the egg. So that is not what I did. Okay. And that's much rarer and more complicated legally. Okay. You have to be younger than I was, right?
Okay.
It's like egg donation. But I did gestational surrogacy where I'm not genetically the mother. And so what happens is the process of IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, where the intended mother undergoes an egg retrieval. Eggs are extracted from her. And then the intended father provides a sample. And then in the lab, in the embryology lab, they put these two together, and there's different ways of doing that. And then you see what you end up with in terms of embryos. There's all kinds of stages they have to get through and survive, and then they're frozen. And then the process is called a transfer of the embryo to my uterus, and then implantation is what we hope for, and doesn't always happen. So in my cousin's case, they had tried their own IVF several times, and with no success. And she decided that she was understandably exhausted from that process, and so they actually used
For those who don't know, in vitro fertilization involves a lot of fertility drugs and treatments and hopefulness, and then despair and shots and hormones, and it's a long, brutal, invasive process.
Exactly. And so they actually got on a list for donated embryos. So in surrogacy, in gestational surrogacy, the important part is that the carrier is not the biological mom. What's less important is where the gametes, which are the eggs and the sperm, came from. They can be donated, either one or both, or they can come from the parents. Okay.
So going back to the hard conversations, the person who was born, he or she?
Her name is Louisa.
Louisa is now how old?
Oh,
roughly.
What is this year? She's 4.5.
Okay. All right. So does Louisa know that you helped birth her? Does she know? Do you have visitation rights? Some of those conversations, like, was that?
No. So she's family. And so because she's family, we visit them anyway. And so we see them every Christmas, and that's our tradition. They live 2.5 hours south of me in Westchester County, New York. And she does know, and her parents have intentionally been upfront with her since she could understand.
Yes. Cool. Okay. So then it came with your most recent experience.
Yeah.
So when you carried and birthed a baby for a married gay couple, 2 gay men. Yes. So talk about how you go back to your husband and say, Mike, we need to talk about this again. And did you know these guys?
I did not. Yeah.
How did that
should I talk about how everything changed in New York State between the two? And that's
we are going to talk about the legislation.
okay, sure.
First.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay. So New York has some of the strongest, most progressive legislation in the country.
Yes.
The surrogate protection law that was passed, that is not passed, I don't know, anywhere else or almost anywhere
No
else.
other state has something like this right now.
So let's talk about what that is, what that provides.
Yeah. So in 2020, the Child Parent Security Act was passed in the New York State legislature, and it went into effect in 2021. And it covers other things than surrogacy, but it changed surrogacy in New York State. So prior to that, New York State was one of 4 states that did not allow compensation for surrogacy. So when I carried for my cousin, I did not receive anything money-wise. And it does that. It provides
allows for compensation.
Yes. Sorry, allows for. You don't have to be.
Right. Does it say the amount? I mean, okay, so it could be $5 million, it could be $20.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the other couple of things it has brought is parentage to the intended parents before birth. So when I delivered Louisa, I was on the birth certificate, I was the legal mother, and my cousin and her husband had to adopt her from me.
Yes.
Which is kind of crazy.
Okay.
Not my baby.
Right.
And can be emotional as well. Like it's a little rough. So the Child Parent Security Act says that the intended parents can be named the legal parents during the pregnancy before the baby is born with a what's called a pre-birth order. And so you have attorneys and they file for these and you get your pre-birth order, and you bring that to the hospital, and the hospital now understands who the baby's going home with and things like this. Yeah. So that's great for the intended parents. The compensation is great for the surrogate.
Married, unmarried, any gender.
Right. In New York State, it doesn't matter. Right. And then I would say like the last thing is the Surrogates Bill of Rights. So again, the only state to have such a thing, but it's a list of rights that surrogates are legally entitled to. And several of them are kind of what we call industry standard. So most surrogates in other states are getting these things, but if you don't get these things, there's a problem. And
health coverage, delivery services.
So you are entitled to independent legal representation of your choice. Of your choice is very important.
Okay.
No one should be picking that for you.
Okay.
Health insurance covered by the intended parents. Life insurance covered by the intended parents of a minimum $750,000 or whatever you qualify for. Okay. And those 2 insurances cover you for up to 12 months post delivery, miscarriage, termination, any way the pregnancy ends. And I would say industry standard is actually only 3 to 6 months for those things. So New York's got it covered.
Yeah.
And a few other things. And I love it because when you see other surrogates in other states talking about what they might be entitled to, and they get pushback from third parties, here in New York, we're like, well, it's the law.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So you also, I guess, afterwards worked as a surrogacy. Hold on, let me get the title. Surrogacy counselor. I've done that word right. Hold on, I'm looking at my notes. Why don't you tell us what?
I was a surrogacy outreach coordinator for an agency.
Yes. Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. And that was after the second surrogate experience?
No, it was before and during and after.
Okay. Amazing. So let's talk about the second pregnancy.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's this new law that was passed in 2020 and went into effect in 2021. And
now agencies, which are all over the country and actually in other countries as well, who serve to match parents with surrogates and then manage what we call a journey. Now they are wanting to match New York surrogates because there's a business for it. Before they didn't. So the lawyer who represented me for my first surrogacy was ready to go to open her own agency. And she actually had a hand in writing the legislation.
Nice.
And the other thing that the bill does is it regulates agencies, which is, again, it's the only one to do that, the only state to regulate agencies. And so they said, do you want to be our first? Well, she said, do you want to come on as surrogacy outreach coordinator, which is basically recruiting surrogates? Sure. I said, sure. And then they said, do you want to be our first surrogate? And at first I said, no. And this was kind of height of COVID. This was the end of 2020.
Yes.
And I thought about it a bit more, talked to my husband again. He agreed. And I said, as soon as there is a vaccine, I will do it again. Because I don't want to go into medical places if I don't need to, unvaccinated during COVID. So
yes. Fair, totally fair.
So I signed up, and I was one of their first to sign up, and I was the first to deliver for that agency.
Amazing. So tell me how you met this couple and how that became the right fit. Did you interview others? How were you matched?
Right. So when you, at least with most agencies are similar, but with this one, which is New York Surrogacy Center, I worked with their gestational, sorry, I'm going to get this wrong, their director of surrogate services. And he asked me for my preferences. And I did have a preference, but not a requirement, to carry for a gay couple. This was something I really wanted to do because they don't have any other way of having a biological child. And I wanted to align on some other things, of course, like termination and things like that. I wanted someone who believed in vaccines and was okay with me being vaccinated and may want me to be, because right. That's actually something that people will match on, that requirement. Okay. And they found the perfect couple for me. And I live near Albany, New York, and they live in Buffalo. So 5 hours away, not that close, but we showed each other our profiles through the agency. We decided, yes, we want to meet. Normally meeting is on Zoom, but we decided to meet halfway in Syracuse. Nice. So we did drive and met each other. We had lunch. They brought me flowers. And we just hit it off, and they were fantastic. And I was like, there's no reason for me to say no to this.
Give me chills. That's amazing. I can't. Yeah. So I know that you went to some medical visits, or they came with you. So they were in 5 hours for the doctor's appointment for the well-being.
Yeah. So going back to IVF and creating embryos, you need to do this at a fertility clinic. There are many all across the country, and many intended parents will choose a clinic that, has the best reviews or is the least expensive or something like that. And so people will travel a lot for these services. Mm-hmm. They chose one that was in their town. So their clinic was in Buffalo. And so one of the first things a surrogate has to do after this preliminary matching with parents is go to that clinic and be medically cleared by that doctor. So they're going to do blood work on you. And also any partner you have needs to get tested for STDs and things like this. And then
diseases.
What's that?
STDs, sexually transmitted diseases.
Yes, sorry. Or any communicable diseases. And they'll also take a look at your uterus to make sure there aren't any obvious problems, such as fibroids, polyps, anything that would inhibit that would prevent or cause problems with a pregnancy.
Yes.
And so I did that first. And I was good to go on that. They also review my past delivery records and birth records. So we have to collect all those and send them to the fertility clinic, make sure that I didn't have any issues in past pregnancies that would disqualify me.
Yes.
And so that's the first stage. Do you want me to keep going with the?
Sure. I'm interested.
So there's always a psychological evaluation. Sometimes this happens before you are matched. Sometimes the agency wants to get that done before they potentially match you with somebody. And sometimes it's done after. I did this after. So I used the same therapist I used for the first time. So she already knew me. And we spent about an hour talking about what this might look like. She also spent some time with the parents.
Yes.
And then we did a joint session.
Okay.
And she brings up important questions like, what kind of communication do you want to have during this process? How much or how little? Are we on the same page?
Yes.
And what kind of communication or relationship do we want when it's all done?
Forward. Absolutely.
And things like that. We'd also, we, as I said, had agreed on the tough issues, but if we would have addressed that or something. Sure. So we did that. And then you make sure your insurance is in place. My own insurance covered the pregnancy. In New York State, there is a, what do you call it? It's not a regulation. I can't remember what the term is, but it requires insurance companies to treat surrogate pregnancies as the woman's own pregnancy as terms of coverage.
Okay.
So they didn't cost them much more. They just paid my portion of my premium. And we got my life insurance set up. That actually took longer than we thought. And then we did contracts. So we each get our own separate attorney who has lots of experience in this area. You want one that's done this before. The intended parent's lawyer writes a draft, sends it to my lawyer. She sends it to me. I spend some time reviewing it, underlining things I'm concerned about. Right. And then we spend a good time reviewing it together.
So let's fast forward to you go through the pregnancy. I mean, how often during this is like, damn it, I'm in pain. I can't sleep. I'm getting fat. Damn those guys. I mean,
like I said, I enjoy pregnancy. So I have never had, I'm very fortunate. Some of the things that people don't like about pregnancy, I don't have morning sickness.
Wow.
I don't have the extreme exhaustion.
Okay.
This is all early pregnancy stuff.
Right.
So what starts bothering me is at the end. And it's simply just what happens when you've got all this extra weight, right? So, and each pregnancy has been different. I've had my daughter in 2 surrogacies, so 3, and each one's a little bit different, but towards the end, it can get rough. There's a lack of sleep due to discomfort, hip pain, all those things, but it doesn't really come until the end. So just go through it.
Do you have visitation? Have you seen their
No, there's no such, we don't do visitation with surrogacy. As a gestational surrogate, you don't have any rights to that child. That's part of it.
So sometimes when birth mothers decide that they want to give their pregnancy up for adoption, it's very traumatic. And once they meet the baby, they say, no, I can't let her go or him go. All along, that this child is not going to remain with you. No problem. Just like, here it is. Have a good luck.
So for me, yes. But unlike in adoption situations, I did this knowing I didn't want any other children. Right. It is not a requirement that you be done having your own children, but it is highly recommended that surrogates be done having your own children for 2 reasons. That psychological aspect of it, but also because any pregnancy can make you infertile.
Yes. Right.
So we don't want you to resent having been a surrogate because now for some reason, maybe you needed an emergency hysterectomy. You can't have more of your own.
Right.
But I didn't want a baby that's not mine, especially. Right.
How do you explain this to Lily? Does she get it that mommy's pregnant, but I'm not getting a baby?
Yeah, she does. And it probably helps that she's an only child. Because she's never had any baby come home. So I kind of, I think that helps a lot. But I've always explained it to her. I think the first time she was a little too young to really understand anything. Yeah. But the second time I really explained everything and the science of it. And I didn't use silly euphemisms like a stork.
No. Oh, that's
like that.
Right.
I explained, and this has helped with her sex education,
Yes.
how babies are made and how we're doing it in a different way on all sides. Right.
Amazing.
And so, including the fact that the parents of the second baby I carried, Mike and RJ, they needed parts from a woman because they're two men. So they have an egg donor.
Yes. Wow. So when you said you wanted to work with a gay couple, were you only looking at men, or did you also consider caring for a woman? For
I that didn't really cross my mind because I actually know quite a few lesbian couples who have done reverse IVF or reciprocal IVF, and they seem to really get a bond and connection over that, and I can explain it in a second. But there's far less of a need for it because we have the parts to carry. The women have the parts to carry.
and easier to get sperm.
Yes.
Donated.
And I think less expensive.
Yes, for sure. So I have to brag that in 2015, in my very first year in the Senate, that I sponsored and passed the very first what I called fertility parity law, which meant that Maryland health insurance companies had to provide mandated coverage for married lesbian couples in the same way that they did for married straight couples for in vitro fertilization if they were ready to start a family. And they had to get their own sperm. They weren't covered for that. But in terms of the lab work and all that, it was cool. And the number of couples, of lesbian couples who've come up to me and said, this is a picture of our daughter, and we wouldn't have been able to afford to have her if it weren't for your law and all that. And that's amazing. So
that's great.
Shout
Thank
out
you.
to Delegate Dr. Terry Hill, who was my House cross-file sponsor. So that was cool. What is the biggest reward and the biggest challenge with being a surrogate?
I mean, the biggest reward is I've been able to help two couples create families.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's being as a surrogate, you get a lot of compliments and comments, positive comments that things along like, oh, you're a blessing and you're an angel and all these things, and I don't do well with that. Yeah. I'm like, I guess. And but what means the most to me is what I've heard from my cousin and from Mike and RJ, their own words to me, whether written or spoken. I clearly know that I did something great here.
Yeah.
I'm going to start crying.
I know, right?
Yeah. From their Christmas cards, or like occasionally I get a text, from my cousin, it'll be like a picture of Louisa on her bicycle, and they were biking in the northern direction, and Louisa would say, oh, that's where Portia lives. Like north of us.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
What about your employer? How did they do at yikes, I can't even read my own writing.
Unsolve.
I can't read my scroll.
It's okay.
So okay, had my own baby. Yes. Okay. Now the surrogate thing. Did they give you leave? How complicated and common is that as a concept?
Right. So no, they don't. And that's in a sense okay. The two surrogacies were very different. In terms of the leave that I got and the leaves that my employer offered. But the first time since this was an uncompensated situation, and I knew that my cousin couldn't afford much more than everything else was costing already.
Yes.
My goal was to take as little time off afterwards as possible, which I now know was probably not the right idea. But so I ended up taking a few days of PTO. This was before COVID, so I was going paid time off. So I was working from an office because this was before COVID.
Yes.
And my manager had agreed, absolutely, you can work from home during, your 6 or 8 weeks recovery, because I had a C-section, which is a couple more weeks of recovery than if not. So then when my HR department which was not in the same office as me. So they were kind of not up on everything that was going on. They knew I was pregnant, but they freaked out a little bit and said, you cannot come back a week later. We need this letter from your OB saying you are cleared and all these things.
Your obstetrician. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm sorry. And I couldn't get that letter fast enough. And so here I am using up my paid time off more than I expected to use. And I did get reimbursed for the value of that paid time off, but I felt very bad that this was more money than we had planned for my cousin to reimburse me for.
Yes.
So
go ahead.
The second time, very different. Let's understand that I don't get maternity leave through the state because I'm not bonding with any child.
Right. So
there is the family leave through the state, but I don't qualify.
So let me, you said when I asked you the best and worst things about surrogacy, you gave me the best, which is changing lives and all stuff. What's the worst part? And then related to that, would you do it again?
So the worst part is probably the shots you give yourself. And, the aches and pains at the end really is the worst. There's not that much bad as far as I'm concerned. And I got quite used to the shots. And it's a little bit of a badge of honor to be able to do them and not flinch, like you get used to it. Like kind of a bad
badass.
ASS. Okay, a badass thing.
No, you're badass.
And when they stop, because you only do it for a certain number of weeks. When they stop, you're like, oh, I feel like the hard part was done, and like, did I earn my keep here?
Right.
Would I do it again if I were not this age and if I had not had 2 C-sections? Yes.
Okay. Wow. So we need to start to wrap up here.
Okay.
We are in an era where there is hate against so many people, but obviously homophobia and anti-LGBTQ hate. In some ways, is this an act of defiance? Is this how did you envision sort of supporting a gay couple in particular?
Yeah. I never really thought about it that way, but I suppose, yes, now that I think about it, this was a way for me to support that community. I think I always did want to support the community, but I didn't really have this forward thought that that's what I'm doing here.
Right.
I also, I had the experience of caring for a straight couple. I wanted to just try something different. And this is no reflection at all on my cousin because she was fantastic the whole way through. But when there is a little bit of a different dynamic when there's no intended mother. I do know other surrogates who have had rough relationships with their intended mothers because, of course, the intended mother is anxious and very emotional and probably wishes she were carrying this baby herself. And so I knew, and I say this with, understanding and empathy of those women, but I knew that doing this might eliminate that.
Right. Okay.
And so I was interested in experiencing that.
Okay. So we have to do just a brief thing on Scrabble and Wordle and connections, because you and I are both word nerds and stuff. How did you start? How old were you when you remember starting to play Scrabble? And when did you start competing? How did you get good at it? And what's your best tip for someone watching who isn't a Scrabble nerd like we are?
Right. Okay. So I started as a kid with my family, but I didn't get serious until I was in my 20s and living in New York City and found some informal Scrabble clubs. So we're talking about games of 3 to 4 people, not sanctioned Scrabble games.
Right.
And then I discovered the world of what is now NASPA, the North American Scrabble Players Association, and the official rules and all these things. And I did play at the New York City Scrabble Club 56 one time. And then when I moved up north to Albany, I found a club here and I've been playing ever since. In New York City, I was a poor 20-something and I couldn't afford tournaments. So since moving up here is when I really got started playing tournaments. And my tip would be, something I never would have thought of before playing tournaments and also reading Stefan Fatzis's book.
Yes, you got to read it. Yes.
Is the leave.
Yes.
Okay. So, which is the idea of, it's a strategy based on the tiles that you leave on your rack after playing. So if you leave some bingo friendly tiles, and a bingo is when you get to play all your letters and get an extra 50 points.
Right.
Then if I leave, SATER on my rack, then I've got much higher chances of making a bingo on my next turn than if I left XC.
I literally had like UUV.
Yeah.
Something. I mean, it was just like, oh my God. And then you have to exchange because there's zero chance you're gonna be able to do anything. Okay. Well, Portia Zwicker, thank you. It is time for the Fast Five. 5 quick questions, 5 quick answers. And the first one, question number 1, you say you live in upstate New York. When I went to Vassar and I called Poughkeepsie upstate New York, yeah, see, people laugh at me.
I know where this is going. Yeah.
How do you define upstate New York?
I've always defined upstate New York as anything north of the thruway once it has turned east-west, right? So the thruway goes up to Albany and then turns west. So if you're above that line, you're upstate.
And you're upstate. All right. Question 2. What do you like best about being a mom?
Well, she's at my the best age right now. Oh, she's not a teenager yet, but we can have fantastic conversations. So the best thing has been seeing her vocabulary grow. I'm like, where did you hear that word? How do you know how to use it? I didn't think I did, and seeing all her skills just grow faster than I could imagine. She's so amazing at math, the way she does math in her head. Amazing. She doesn't even need to be taught Common Core. She just does it in her head. So just seeing that development has been amazing.
That's great. Question 3. What is your favorite musical genre? What do you like listening to?
My likes vary widely because I play the viola, so I love listening to chamber music, but I love playing it even more. So probably from the Romantic and Classical era, not so much Baroque or more modern, but the Romantic era is my favorite. I did my thesis on Tchaikovsky, but I also like a lot of pop.
Okay. Question number 4. Who is someone you admire most and why?
I'm going to say Judith Enck. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's an environmentalist, and she used to be an EPA regional administrator for my region, which is New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. She was appointed by Obama. Nice. But now she is a professor at Bennington College, and she started an organization called Beyond Plastics. And
I'm aware of that.
Styrofoam bin, right?
Yes. Very proud of Maryland having been.
She's like my environmental hero, and I will email her with any questions I might have on things. But I took her Beyond Plastics class, and I learned so much. And I basically trust her on everything in the realm of plastics.
Love that. So I have to say, I create 1 or maybe 2 plastic water bottles per year. I find it so antithetical. So I've got my tea here. I've got another mug of tea here that says refills, not landfills. Yeah. And then, of course, there's the mug of tea.
Yeah.
I drink a lot of tea.
My mug is, I make families. What is your superpower?
Okay.
But it's a little obnoxious, as if saying like you don't have a superpower. Yeah.
There you go. Well, that leads us to question number 5, the question that I ask everyone. Portia Zwicker, gestational surrogate. What is your hidden secret superpower? And I'm not going to allow the making babies part. What is a skill or what is a skill or talent you have, something you're really good at that most folks can't do?
That was the answer I was going to give.
It's a little too obvious, right?
Right, I guess. Oh, Cheryl.
All right.
Stumped
I let
me.
you get away with it.
Um, I I can teach anyone in 10 minutes everything they need to know about being an electric vehicle driver and what that takes.
Okay. When did you get your first EV?
A little over 3 years ago. And so my husband and I both have one now.
Nice.
And I do EV advocacy work around town and things like that.
Fantastic. Well, good for you. That's a cool thing. I didn't know that. All right. Well, Portia, thank you so much for chatting today. I learned a lot. I suspect that anyone who's watching learned a lot and has just great admiration for you and for the other women who are willing to do this to help create families. So
Thank
thank
you.
you. I look forward to seeing you soon at a Scrabble tournament.
Yes, maybe New Year's.
Woo! All right. Stay well.
Thank you.
Bye.